everybody. Thank you for joining me on this latest edition of At the Table. We're taping the show at the University of Chicago's Institute of Politics, where I'm a fellow, and our guests are my fellow fellows. We have Republican Mick Mulvaney, former President Donald Trump's ex-chief of staff, and California Democrat Jackie Speer, a former member of Congress. Let's just get at it. The field is set.
I have a question before we start.
Absolutely.
It's called At the Table.
Yes.
Yet there is no table.
Well, we'll do a long shot and we'll show there are tables around us.
We're near the table.
Right. So it is a metaphor. At the table at the moment, but good point. I'm glad you brought it up, Nick, and we're going to plow through it without the table.
You got it.
But we're talking now as the field is set. The July Milwaukee Convention of Republicans will renominate Trump for a third term. Biden will be renominated for a second term when Democrats meet in August in Chicago. I want to start with something that's in the news right now because Trump came out with his abortion, well, I'll call it platform statement. It's new as we're talking, and he said in the statement in the video, he is not in favor of a national abortion ban. He said it should be left up to states. He also said that he supports in every state fertility treatments, including IVF. So the backlash came. Slap in the face, said Michael Pence. Some other pro-life leaders thought he let him down. So Mick, what is going on here and what's the impact?
You know, I've been asked about this a couple times in the last 24 hours, and I don't understand Mike Pence's reaction. I don't understand this slap in the face. In fact, for Mike, that's a very unusual, very strong language. One of the most mild-mannered men you are ever going to see. And I guess my reaction to Mike, the vice president, once you're in the House together, everybody's first name, right? So my reaction to Mike would be, Mike, we spent 50 years in the pro-life movement trying to convince people that abortion should be left to the states, that Roe was wrongly decided because it created a federal right where none existed, and that abortion had been regulated by the states up until 1973. And we won. And that's what Dobbs said. Dobbs said there is no federal right. It goes back to the states. So for 50 years we were fighting, and then we win, and now we want it to be a federal issue again? I don't understand why what Donald Trump just said isn't entirely consistent with the pro-life movement. I consider myself to be pro-life. I was involved in the White House when we were picking judges and so forth, right? I don't find the statement offensive at all. If there was any pushback from the truly devoutly religious pro-life, if you want to come up with a complaint, it would be about the exceptions, which some people don't agree with, right? That life is a life, it doesn't make any difference. But I don't understand this pushback about leaving it to the states, because that's what we've been telling people for half a century.
So he could be still bragging that he appointed the justices that undid Roe v. Wade and still had this position. But Jackie, doesn't this just give Biden, who is making abortion a centerpiece, another opening? What changes, if anything, with this statement?
Well, his statement is mush. I mean, what we have is a history of his saying that he is responsible for getting rid of abortion in this country because he appointed those three justices. I think that he's going to be slammed, not just by the right, but by the left and by suburban women who don't want government in their uteruses. And, you know, for the Republicans to say that we have to control your body as a woman, even though they believe that, you know, personal rights should be first and foremost and government should get out of my life, it just flies in the face of that. The other thing about this issue is in the 1800s, abortion was legal in this country. In fact, people advertised their abortion services in the 1860s. It really wasn't until the early 1900s, late 1800s, when a bill was passed that said you couldn't distribute abortion material or propaganda, as they refer to it. And now the justices are using this late 1800s law to try and suggest that that's the basis on which they're making their decisions. It's crazy.
So do you think Biden should go, is it possible to go harder on abortion than he is? And also, I want to point out, since we are in Chicago, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker has his own political operation where he's going to swing states or states that have an abortion question on the ballot to help bolster the troops in those states. What and how is the Biden administration in terms of policy and then in politics handling this?
Oh, I think it's going to be front and center as one of the issues that divides the two of them. And, you know, the suburban women in this country, I think, are going to be key to a Democratic victory.
And we hear that always suburban women. I've done this from local races on up. So does this weaken Trump with suburban women, especially in the swing states?
I don't think the statement weakens Trump, but I think Jackie is right in that abortion will be front and center. It certainly was in the 2022 midterm elections, and the Democrats are doing exactly what they should do to try and drive it to the top of the list right now. If I was in a Democrat-controlled swing state, I would be putting an abortion issue on the ballot, just like Karl Rove did back in the early 2000s, putting gay marriage initiatives on the ballot in order to drive the Republican base. It's just smart politics. I don't think Trump's statement changes any of that. I don't think anybody was thinking, oh, I was going to vote for Trump, but now he's come out with his statement, and now I'm not going to vote for Trump. I think, if anything, it's his first real tack to the center. So him come out and talking about the exceptions and so forth is really the first time I've seen him sort of go after folks who are supposedly in the center of the country. I don't think people wonder more of its impact, I think, it's been out 24 hours. And the initial response is, will this turn off Republicans? And certainly Mike Pence and other folks have attacked him. I just don't think those folks end up voting for somebody else in November. I think they ultimately come back to Donald Trump. If you are truly a pro-life voter, okay, you might not like the statement, okay, but you got to look your hand over and say, well, Trump did exactly what he said he was going to do the first time. If you're a pro-life voter, you know that Donald Trump is the best, is the most pro-life president you've ever had. It'd be hard to imagine them abandoning him just because of this statement.
Well, how about abandoning him? Mick, you have insight few have, being in the Oval Office with him. As we speak, the Trump hush money trial, a criminal trial, is likely to start next week.
Yeah.
The multiple indictments against him and the multiple cases against him seem to make him get stronger. But with an actual trial starting now, what's the impact, do you think, on on his chances of becoming president?
Free airtime for Donald Trump.
I would agree with that.
This is a campaign stop for him. Now, I have seen some data that should be concerning to the Trump campaign, that if he is convicted of a crime, that might cost him some Republican votes. The Republicans who have polled and said, look, I don't think I could vote for him. He was actually a convicted criminal. I'm not sure this case is the one that will move the needle. Of all of the cases against Donald Trump, this is, arguably the very weakest of the lot. I've often said that if Donald Trump wins re-election, the single person most responsible for that will be Alvin Bragg, because this is when this case came out, people forget there were actually Democrats defending Donald Trump, saying this was so obviously politically motivated. So it actually might help him that this goes first. What he's been able to do is use this case and say, look at this case. Everybody knows this case is a sham. All the rest of them are just the same type of thing.
So I'm sitting in the Oversight Committee when Michael Cohen comes to testify. And on the screen are checks signed by Donald Trump to Stormy to hush her up. Now, in any other kind of setting, that would have been a death knell.
But it's not illegal.
Well,
it's not a crime. That's not what he's charged with. He's charged with not reporting it correctly. But paying hush money is not illegal.
It's not illegal to pay hush money. What does that tell you about our country?
We do have a system of laws.
Well, he
also
used business money to do that, which would be illegal as well.
You could do it as long as he's charged with not reporting it properly.
He didn't report it to the Federal Elections Commission.
Correct.
And he probably used it as
at least that's the charge, yes.
A business deduction in his business,
that is the
which
charge,
would be
yes.
illegal as well.
So these other criminal cases, though, that are more serious, it seems likely they would not, even the Jack Smith cases, which have to do with election subversion, probably the most
He's
serious.
got two, right? Isn't he also he's doing the document case as well, right?
Hard to say if any of those cases will even be appealed now, because there's a whole question of presidential. There's two questions that Trump has out there that he hopes, I guess, to get to the Supreme Court. that he's immune as president, and then it comes to the documents that because he was president, he could take whatever he wanted, and he's relying on an act of Congress that is not relevant in the indictment. But I want to boil this down. Again, I need you in a sense to help explain why none of this raises questions, why the base is never eroded. And as you answer it, tell me if, on the other hand, this helps grow the base, or it just cranks up the existing people who would vote for Trump anyway.
I think it's provable that he's actually gotten stronger politically since these lawsuits have started. And I go back to the weakness of the very first case, the Alvin Bragg case, which is the one that's coming to trial next week. And it gave Trump something he lacked, which is he didn't have that 2 or 3 sentence elevator speech that's how do you sum up why he's running for president. And I think this is the summary, Lynn. It's, look what they're doing to me.
Yeah.
And I'm rich and I'm famous. If they do it to me, imagine what they can do to you. Elect me and I'll make sure
so
that
this
doesn't
is
happen.
grievance politics to the max.
I think this is appealing to people who don't trust their government and are worried that at some point the government might come down on them, and they don't like that.
But that's the core of who he is, too. This grievance politics is what he brought in the 2016
Divide
election.
and conquer, that's right.
So why is it, again, and it is, I hope you could explain better than my understanding why the Trump election denialism sticks, why so many people, I mean, I know you have thought this through. Joe Biden won the election, you lost legal battles, maybe you should have complained earlier in the process about changes in laws because of COVID. Why does it just stick with religious fervor with people?
No idea. Neither do I know why he keeps looking back at it. Joe Biden is a weak president in terms of his polling and his approval ratings right now, right? He's in the same place that Trump was, or lower than Trump was in 2020, lower than Barack Obama or Jimmy Carter. He's a weak president. And why Trump has to go back and talk about something that not that many people care about other than him, when he could be drawing contrast between him and Biden, makes no sense to me. But every time I had those types of conversations with the president when I was in the White House, he would look at me and go, so tell me how many elections you've won for president. And I would say none. And he would say, good, we're going to do it my way because that's worked for me in the past. And he's not going to change. So you can expect him to continue to talk about the 2020 election going forward.
Yeah, the other thing that I think is important to point out is that this 30% that is rock solid for him has a fair amount of racism in it.
Okay. That didn't take long. We 10 minutes, and we're now we're racist. Is that
No,
is that
no,
where
no,
that
no.
was
But I
coming
think he gave people the license to complain about things like DEI and the folks at Charlottesville, that they were nice people. I mean, there are people that in this country are still racist, and I think that they see a commonality with Trump being able to push back on what he sees as not being fair.
If you're going to say that the Republican Party has a small element of racism to deal with, I think that is a fair statement. At the same time, you have to say, if we're going to talk about these types of issues, that the Democrat Party has a small element of anti-Semitism that they have to deal with.
Well, I want to challenge you on that, because I was going to hold off talking about the Israel-Hamas war until a little later, but I don't see why that is, why you could hang that just on one party right now. So could you explain a little more why you think, now, and this is anti-Semitism, I take that you're bringing up in the wake of the war.
I'm bringing it up because she brought up racism. If we're going to talk about the weaknesses that both parties have, let's talk about the weaknesses that both parties have. And there's an anti-Semitic element to the Democrat Party.
Or is it a pro-Palestinian wing? Doesn't mean it's anti-Semitism. The truth of the matter is the Democrats have held strong in terms of supporting Israel. So how can you say that's anti-Semitic?
Well, they have. Listen, Joe Biden, I thought, did a wonderful job the first 5 months. I think he's now bending to political pressure to change his policy towards Palestine and Israel.
Well, I don't know that. I mean, I would suggest that the answer there is that you had World Central Kitchen lose 7 people that they shouldn't have lost, and they're using AI to drop bombs on people, and that 33,000 people that are civilians have been killed in Gaza, and 2/3 of them are women and children. I think at some point we've got to step back and just look at the absolutely horrific activity that's going on there under the guise that it's about war and peace. It's about slaughtering people.
Right, and also
And if we're going to talk about slaughtering people and horrific acts, then let's start with what started it, which was the invasion of Israel by Hamas.
So,
No
so
question.
Which you
here's the
didn't
point.
mention in any of what you just said.
Well,
And most of the Democrats do not, including Biden, anymore.
right,
Used to, haven't recently.
He has been constant in talking about bringing the hostages home. He has met with hostage families, but here's the thing: I do not
We
want to
still have
give
5 citizens. I think we still have 5 if they're still
yes,
alive.
including a young man whose folks were raised in Chicago
Okay.
on this. But the point is, this is an issue that is not going to go away. And Jackie, in the hand, and also the administration has changed because the way Prime Minister Netanyahu has prosecuted the war has evolved from the first or second weeks of the war coming on, and the way he has prosecuted it has forced a change in the Biden approach. And we'll wait and see. I guess there's a question of whether or not there will be approval for more weapons and if they come with conditions. But Jackie, how do you think this will impact even the Democratic convention? You know, we know that there are demonstrations going on in Chicago and other cities all the time. What do you think is going to happen, and what the impact will be?
There's no question that there are going to be substantial demonstrations that go on, hopefully not akin to 1968, but there are people within the Democratic Party that feel strongly that we have abandoned the Palestinian people in this war that continues really unchecked.
So what I don't get, Mick, is, you know, life, as you know, both of you being in the House, it's a binary, well, not binary always. You could vote yes, you could vote no, you could not vote, or you could be present. But that's it. You have Trump, you have Biden, and some third-party candidates, no labels, never mounted one, and if we have time, we'll get to Robert Kennedy. My point is, in terms of what Trump has going forward, he has hardly explained his positions. You don't know if he will reimpose a Muslim ban, as he did early in his first administration. Do you have any sense, and maybe I missed it, exactly what would be the Trump plan to deal with the Israeli-Hamas war, and what his
No, and I think
position would be?
I think he's been strategically ambiguous on it for a reason. I think he sees that Biden is struggling, and there's a general rule in politics, which is when your opponent is digging a hole, you don't take away their shovel, right? I mean, both parties do that. So I think there's been a decision to sort of step back and let Biden try and have it both ways. He did come out and say that the war, I think he said something about the war needed to end, or Netanyahu, or I can't remember. He said something that was mildly forceful towards Netanyahu, but that's about it.
If I were in a position to, if Trump were sitting here, there are scores of questions that no one even has asked him. You know, his usual go-to point, both of you have seen, I could solve this or that in 24 hours. He once said he could solve crime in Chicago in 24 hours. He says he could end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours. None of it is true. So let me ask you that, as being in the Oval Office.
Has he said that about Israel? I don't know if he's, because he did say that about Ukraine. He could solve Ukraine
He
in
has
24
said
hours.
this.
Has he said that about
Chicago.
Palestine?
No.
I don't know if he has.
No, he didn't say that.
Yeah.
He did not say it there. But that's kind of his go-to place. Meaning, is there any force you see out there that you think Republican voters will want to see a plan from him, or somehow need something from him to know about this? What about the evangelical Christians who are so important to the Trump base?
I don't think they're going to say, well, you know what, if Trump doesn't give us a plan on what's going to happen in Palestine, I'm not voting for him. I just don't see that. I don't see that happening.
There is a fair amount of isolationism, is there not, in the Republican Party? They don't want us engaged around the world. They don't see
I
it as
describe it as
Georgia.
non-interventionalism. Yes, there are certainly isolationists within the party. I don't think that Rand Paul is an isolationist as much as and Donald Trump wasn't. Donald Trump was a non-interventionist, believes in peace through strength, but also didn't want to get involved overseas if he didn't have to.
Tell me the biggest insight you got about what makes Donald Trump tick from being in the Oval Office.
Goodness gracious, that's a long discussion. Insights as to how he...
One or two, just something that you didn't know, but you observed.
Boy, you could pick from a long list. As I mentioned yesterday to the seminar, is that one of the things I think that people criticize him for is not having any principles. And that's entirely wrong. The stuff he cares about deeply and fundamentally, and those include tax policy, those include immigration, they include regulation. But the stuff that he doesn't really care that much about intrinsically, he loves to surround himself with people who disagree. Like I used to offer to sell tickets to the trade meetings in the Oval Office. That was tongue in cheek, but they used to sometimes devolve into shouting matches between the protectionist wing of the party and the free trade wing of the party. And Trump loved it. He loved to see the debate back and forth. He loved to put what he considered to be smart people in the room and let them yell at each other. And he saw himself as the moderator, the mediator, the judge, and so forth. That was a fascinating. He's not the first person ever to sort of lead, managed by conflict, but he was really good at it.
Well, Abraham Lincoln had his team of rivals, but when he does moderate those conversations, does he glean anything from it, or does his position stay as it was before the discussion ever took place?
I've seen him be swayed by people who are making arguments. For example, he had a very aggressive position on steel imports. He wanted to put a slap of tariff on all steel imports coming to the United States. And that was the position taken by the hardest core protectionist wing of his staff. And then over the course of many, many debates, we'll call them that politely, in the Oval Office, he said, okay, I'm still good with the steel tariffs on China, but let's cut a different position on Australia. They're our allies. It's a different kind of steel. We don't make it here. We need it for this. So he was able to go through and say, okay, he was able to temper his position based upon the information he had.
Second Trump term, which may happen. Jackie, I know you're a Democrat and you don't want it to happen, but Biden is struggling. What would a second Trump term look like? And in the interest of time, let me try and narrow my question. Would people like you, people who came out of Congress, came out of government, had substantial experience, come to work again for him as he was able to get in his first cabinet? What is the second term going to be?
I think it's an excellent question, and I think the answer is they're already working at it. One of Trump's greatest strengths was also his greatest weakness, which is he came to Washington with no familiarity with Washington. And it took his team a while to figure out how the place ran. Okay? They're not going to have that problem the second time around.
That's what makes him so much more dangerous.
Again, if you don't like his policies, that's a true statement. But he's not going to take him 18 months to figure out how to...
Would you get a bar to run the Justice Department? Would you get people who believe in government, who just don't want to shut things down? Or would it be a Marjorie Taylor Greene type of person running things? Or
you
what?
tell me
Who's
how
going to do
Marjorie
it?
Taylor Greene is going to be confirmed by the Senate. I think there's a fair question.
She would be
to
a
ask.
recess. Actually, though, Trump used recess appointments, so everyone knows these are appointments that you don't need Senate confirmation for. And at one time, I forget it was on your watch.
I don't think that's factually accurate.
So didn't he do something to avoid confirmation?
Well, Chris Miller was not
at some point.
Right. No, there were several who were not Senate confirmed, but there was never a recess appointment because
Not,
I
okay,
don't believe the Senate ever went into recess.
Okay, let me take the term
for that exact reason.
Let me rephrase it because I used a very specific term. I thought there were some appointments that he avoided using various techniques to avoid Senate confirmation.
The tool that he used was called the Vacancies Act.
Yes.
And that essentially, I'm going to condense it here for the purposes of this conversation. Yeah. If you have a vacancy at a Senate confirmed position, another Senate confirmed position can fill that space for a temporary period of time. It's how I served as the director of the CFPB on an acting basis. That is a Senate confirmed position. It was vacant when Richard Cordray left to run for, I think, governor or Senate in Ohio. And since I was Senate confirmed at OMB, I was able to go
get
and do
to
it.
my
And he
bottom
did that
line,
several times.
Do you think people of experienced stature will go back to work in a second Trump term, knowing what happened?
The names that I've heard, for example, and I just talked to Mike Pompeo this week. I've heard his name a couple times. I've heard Robert O'Brien, who's very capable at national security. I've heard that Senator Haggerty might be interested
Really?
in a state position. Stephen Mnuchin is now on TV, which leads me to believe he wants to come back and
He'll be
work
back?
for him.
Really?
After he buys TikTok?
You know, yeah, that's exactly right. So it's a fair conversation.
Let me just say one thing. You're presuming that President Biden is down. And while he has been down, since the State of the Union speech, he has shown a lot more muscle. And there are 18 polls more recently that have showed him ahead of Trump. So it's still way
It's
too
very
early.
much up in the air. I think that's fair.
Way
And
too
I think
early.
it'll go back and forth several times between now and then, depending
Right,
on
and in
who sticks his
election
foot in his
time,
mouth.
like dog years, we have a lot that can happen on this. But since we're talking about names, and then I'll get back to Biden, who are the people, either ones that you know really are under consideration or that you hear in the mill, who Trump might pick for vice
My
president?
top tier is Elise Stefanik, Kristi Noem, Tim Scott, and Ben Carson.
What is there one that you think is the weakest of the four, and who's the
I
strongest?
think they'll all be very good vice presidential candidates.
Speaking of vice president,
Yes.
your fellow Californian, Vice President Kamala Harris, in your assessment, in terms of how she's doing on the campaign trail, there have been stories that maybe she should be used more or less or whatever. She has abortion now as her main thing. Do you think there's adjustments that should be made? Any insight as to her role in the reelection?
I think she has a big role in this run-up to the election because the African American vote is not as strong as it was in 2020, and she needs to, I think, deliver for the Democrats, and I think that she'll be in a position to do that, along with the abortion issue.
But you were
And I
about to.
also, would you agree that because of Biden's age, and both the gentlemen are old, that for a rare time people might actually pay closer attention to who the vice presidential candidate is because of the age of the top candidate, both on the Democrat and the Republican side? Would you agree with that or not?
Well, I think it has been a talking point that people are concerned as to who will the vice president be and what are their qualifications and the like, and who former President Trump picks as his running mate. I actually think it's going to be Kristi Noem
She's
And why is
on my
that?
list.
because she's attractive, first and foremost, and that's important to him. And and she's run a state. I think governors are in a much stronger position to be vice presidential candidates because they've governed.
Right. So, we're at the Institute of Politics. I had the privilege of knowing it in another appointment I had years ago, Elise Stefanik, when she was a student on it. And it is a little mind-blowing to
Really?
me to see how she has evolved through the years.
She was here?
No, she was at Harvard.
At Harvard. Okay, all right,
Harvard's
gotcha.
Institute of Politics. And it also speaks to an Institute of Politics and the powerful influence they have in lives and why a place like the University of Chicago's Institute of Politics is important in helping people find their roles and paths in public service and making connections. So I've observed her metamorphosis from a conservative George Bush, Ken Duberstein mold, getting jobs in the White House, then going on to run, which people that gravitate to these institutes have an interest often in doing, and then just becoming, I'm going to use the term, a Trump acolyte.
That's fair.
What do you call her evolution that you had a ringside seat to sing?
I did, but I don't know Elise very, very well. We may have overlapped for 2 years in the House. I'm not sure about that. So I don't pretend to know her extraordinarily well, but I think your description is accurate. I knew her as sort of a moderate New York Republican, and it was unusual in my mind to see her at least becoming one of the most members of Congress most supportive of the president.
I served with her for a number of years, and she actually won a seat that had been a Democratic seat, and so she was much more moderate, so that she could appeal to Democrats in that particular district. And she has, swung to the right in a manner that has frankly gone on with a lot of members of Congress because of the power and persuasion that Donald Trump has on an electorate that they really feel compelled to be respectful of if they want to stay elected to office. I mean, he has a lock on 30% of the Republicans.
And isn't that the fuel behind the Biden impeachment move in the House?
Of course it is. Well, I mean, I think that Mr. Comer, Congressman Comer, was really ill-prepared to take on that role, and he has unfortunately not been effective at creating the environment which people say, oh yeah, he's got to be impeached. There's no basis on impeaching him, and it's clearly been done to try and subdue the fact that Donald Trump has been impeached twice. So if you can throw, Biden, well, he's been impeached too. I mean, it's not going to happen.
I've never understood the Mayorkas impeachment unless they have evidence that I've not seen of him instructing people not to follow the law. I don't understand that. I don't understand the politics of it. I don't understand the.
But that's really the danger now. It doesn't matter. Nothing
it certainly
matters.
Didn't matter the first time either with Trump. The second time I still don't understand. I completely understand. I thought the first impeachment of Donald Trump was a political show trial.
I would disagree with you because he was trying to trade with Zelensky, to not give him military aid unless he found dirt on his opponent, Joe Biden. So I mean, he's always been about what's in it for me, not what's in it for my country.
Well, but both of you are know the House though. Mm-hmm. Isn't it just going to fizzle, this impeachment right now at this point?
I'm not sure they've got the votes to move forward
on it. So
the margin is down to what now? 2 votes or something like that?
It's 1 vote right now.
Is it 1? Depends on who shows up for work that day.
Right.
Right. So we have a few minutes left here, and I just want to have a sense of what kind of in closing, what can Biden do that he's not doing to get the people, Republicans who do not want to vote for Trump, not to sit it out and not to vote for a third party? What does he do to make somebody do something that goes against their DNA, in this case, at this time, in this election?
I think he has to reach out to them. I mean, the Nikki Haley wing, if you want to call it that, are up for grabs. And Donald Trump has not made any kind of gestures in their way. In fact, has basically said they're irrelevant. So I think the president has to go in a very aggressive way to seek their support.
And how would he do that? What would he say to those folks? What policy can he offer?
It's all personal, isn't it? It's having someone give you attention that can sway people one way or the other. I think that
might count for swing voters. I'm not sure you can get folks who used to vote Republican to vote for Biden because they're paying him attention.
But if they're never Trumpers, they're looking for someone. So they're either going to vote for Robert Kennedy, or they're going to vote for Joe Biden. Those are their two choices. Or not vote.
So
the answer to your question is I don't think Biden can do anything to get those votes. And I think both parties realize that. One of the reasons I don't think you've seen any party, either of the candidates, move to the center. Maybe the Trump comment about abortion is an exception to that. But I don't think there's much of a center left. I think what they're trying to make sure, the Democrats are trying to make sure that their base votes for Biden. That the Palestinian Americans in Michigan, despite their disapproval of how he's handled Gaza, still vote for Biden. They're never going to vote for Trump. But the Democrats are worried that they stay home. On the right side of the ledger, I think the Trump people are worried that the never Trump people won't come home and vote for Donald Trump. I don't think they're concerned they're going to vote for Joe Biden, but they might not vote. I think both parties right now are just trying to figure out a way not only to get their people to show up, but to make sure that their people actually do vote for them and they're not fighting over the middle like we have for the last 40 years.
So there's not really any true persuadables out there of the disaffected Trump people.
These are the two most well-known politicians of the last 50 years at least. There's not a lot of unknowns about them, is there?
Well, I think you could argue that what's unknown is how they would lead moving forward. And, in my view, former President Trump is someone who is much more dangerous this time around because he knows the system, which he didn't know coming into the presidency. He was, an accidental president, so to speak. He didn't expect to win. And then when he won, he was kind of playing by the rules for a while. And then as he was there longer and longer, he, attempted to use the military in ways that are frightening, I think, to the average American. right before the insurrection. I mean, he really wanted to call out the military, as you remember.
On it. So do you have any message at all that you think is useful in this election, given your
Message to who?
A message just to voters about what to think about in thinking about or assessing a second Trump presidency, and then the same to you, and this will be the last thing as we wind up.
I think the election is going to be about what most of our elections are about, which is the economy. I just think, I mean, there's going to be a certain group of people, and it could be a large group of people this time, who make abortion a bigger issue because it is a hot topic. The immigration is probably a bigger issue right now than it has been in the past years, and it's a bigger issue for different people than it usually is. Typically, immigration is an issue that Republicans use to get out the base. I think the impact of immigration has been so nationwide now, and you have Democrat governors and mayors complaining about it, that it's now a bigger national issue than it has been. But at the end of the day, I still think it's the economy.
Jackie, last word.
So I actually agree that the economy is a huge component, abortion being second. I think the weakness for us as Democrats is immigration. And the ability, the bill that the Senate has passed that came to the House is pretty draconian.
Actually, the Senate didn't pass it.
Oh, you're right. But the one that they had agreed to, and that James Langford was hung out to dry on, Senator Langford, was a very, you couldn't get that passed in a Trump administration.
That's fair.
And so the fact that it didn't pass, we aren't doing anything, is problematic for President Biden.
And if we had more time, we could spend a whole show just on the immigration issues. But I see the point that if people are looking for just a place where there is an enormous difference between Trump and Biden, and look at how it impacts your communities, especially in Chicago, you have places where the politics and the policies diverge. Anyway, thank you for joining me at the Institute of Politics on the University of Chicago campus. Mick Mulvaney, former chief of staff to former President Donald Trump, and former Democratic Congresswoman from California, Jackie Speier. And to everyone out there, thank you for joining me on this edition of At the Table.